New Orleans is far and away the least appealing job of the head coaching cycle. Number one, the roster is not in good shape. Number two, they're in cap hell. And number three, the GM, Mickey Loomis, has a ton of autonomy.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a Finish Strong Friday. It's not a Picks Friday because there's nothing to pick. And I'm certainly not going to pick the Pro Bowl games. I got to be honest with you. I might ask Jack after our guest, but I don't even know what the Pro Bowl games are. I've never watched them. I have no idea. So hopefully Jack can look it up and do some research in the next 15 minutes while I'm talking with Jordan Schultz, who's become one of the top, 3 or 4 NFL insiders in the world. It's extremely impressive. Can you even imagine how hard of an industry or field that is to break into? Kudos to Jordan. Super, super impressive. We are presented by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Here's the deal. It's not a Picks Friday. It's still a Winners Friday because we can have winners, although I just realized I didn't pick any winners. So not only is it not a Picks Friday, I didn't pick any winners. It is still a Finish Strong Friday. We're going to finish this thing strong. That I can assure you. And you know what? Since I'll be flying down to New Orleans on Sunday, and Jack and I will be doing all the shows from the Super Bowl next week, media night, and lots of guests and all that stuff, I will be able to pick some winners on the flight down. So those of you that spread the word via social media, we're looking for some people that rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, or go ahead at Ross Tucker Pod, engage in any way, take advantage of any of our sponsors. You know we love westshorehome.com/Ross, or Ross on the Game Time app, or on DraftKings. And then the YouTube shout out, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. But first, it is my guy, Jordan Schultz, presented by Labatt Blue Light. Drink some of those bad boys with your friends. Live life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York.
The Big Show.
Always good to bring on my guy, Jordan Schultz, here on the show. I think we do it maybe a couple times a year now. He's been absolutely killing it with all of the news breaking, especially since the season ended with all the coaching stuff. And I guess, Jordan, I want to start there. And by the way, you should check him out on social media like I do. At Schultz_report is his Twitter handle. Jordan, we saw recently Kingsbury didn't want to interview with the Saints. Joe Brady declined. McCarthy pulled out. I think I know what that means. But just kind of your thought process on these other guys, in particular Brady and Kingsbury, not even wanting to interview with the Saints.
Yeah, so I reported yesterday that Cliff was going to push it down a year, wait, and obviously return to Washington to work with Jaden Daniels and Dan Quinn, and they got something really special going. But if you look at the big picture about Cliff, and you mentioned Joe Brady, New Orleans is far and away the least appealing job of the head coaching cycle. Number one, the roster is not in good shape. Number two, they're in cap hell. And number three, the GM, Mickey Loomis, has a ton of autonomy. And I think most people view that job as not only a job to stay away from, but a job that you really just can't win with, because the process to build in New Orleans is going to take so long. And they're stuck with Derek Carr. They obviously just extended Alvin Kamara. They don't really have a lot of trade assets. And the one good thing is that division, but even the division, I think, is getting better. I think Carolina will be more competitive, Atlanta and Tampa. So I don't really know who's going to end up taking that job. I assume, and I think we all do, it's going to be Kellen Moore. And I think he's very qualified. But the New Orleans job as a whole is not viewed particularly well. And you mentioned Mike McCarthy. Look, I never want to like hammer a guy, but I'll tell you point blank, because my job is to be honest. Mike McCarthy's market was not what he expected. It did not materialize. I reported this at the time. It was a 2-horse race between him and Ben Johnson in Chicago, but Chicago was always targeting Ben. And New Orleans, despite the connection with him and Mickey Loomis, never really asserted themselves as, we really want you. We need to have you, Mike McCarthy. And as a result, he shuts it down before he can get rejected. And obviously he's now without a job.
I wonder in hindsight, and nobody knows, and I guess I'll take you back to that, what actually happened with him and Jerry Jones in Dallas, because it really seemed like Jerry Jones wanted to bring him back. At some point, maybe to your point, Jordan, Mike McCarthy thought he would have better choices elsewhere, and then he didn't. So it's like they broke up, and McCarthy's dating nobody, and the Cowboys might be dating somebody worse.
So if you look back to Jerry Jones, Ross, he did not have a plan. I think him and Mike McCarthy both believed that McCarthy would be back. They end up not getting an extension. And as a result, Jerry ends up settling on Brian Schottenheimer, which, let's be honest, that's what happened. He settled on Brian Schottenheimer because Schottenheimer will acquiesce to Jerry. He's not going to rock the boat. In many ways, this reminds me of the Jason Garrett hire in 2010. It's a very safe hire with a low floor and a low ceiling. And this is not a knock on Brian Schottenheimer as a coach, but he's not, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of most in this league, ready to be a head coach at this point in time. Okay. And then in McCarthy's case, McCarthy, I think, thought he would have more interest, whether it was Chicago or New Orleans or elsewhere. And the interest never really percolated the way he anticipated. And as a result, you almost wonder, would both sides, in hindsight being 2020, just say, let's just run it back? Because I think Dallas, in much respect, would have preferred at least having Mike McCarthy there than Brian Schottenheimer. And McCarthy, if he hadn't gotten a job, I'm sure would have preferred to stay in Dallas.
You know, it's interesting. I guess I assumed, and like a lot of people probably assumed, that McCarthy, for him to turn down, it sounded like it was about the length of the contract, right? Obviously you would know more than I do, but it sounded like it was the length of the contract, and that McCarthy basically thought he had leverage, had better options elsewhere, and said, nope, I'm not doing that. But then he didn't. He thought he had leverage, thought he had other options, but he didn't. You mentioned that they couldn't find an agreement. What was the issue, Jordan, between Jerry Jones and McCarthy? Was it just the length of the contract, or was it other things?
The length of the contract was an issue. McCarthy wanted multiple years, and Jerry was not willing to provide that. So that's the impetus of it all. But then there's other problems, and I think staff was part of it as well. Certain elements of control, like Jerry. At the end of the day, Jerry in his mid-80s is not going to change. Like that old expression, like a zebra doesn't change its stripes. That's Jerry Jones, okay? And I'm past saying like he's inept and he's not a good owner anymore. I'm just past that. What I have come to the realization is the Dallas Cowboys are not about winning. They are about eyeballs and clicks and relevance. And yet, this is a franchise that really hasn't been relevant in 30 years, okay? So the Cowboys, if they were being smart and lucid, would look in the mirror and realize, Jerry, that this is not like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's really where they're at, okay? And if you're Jerry Jones, you're not going to change. And Brian Schottenheimer is a safe hire because you can control the outcome. You're going to have the power and the ability to run the show the way you want. And going back to McCarthy, it's really, I would say that Jerry believed not only that McCarthy would be back, but that McCarthy felt he needed to come back because this is the Dallas Cowboys. And there was a significant disconnect. Now, forget the contract negotiations for a minute. There was a significant disconnect between Jerry and McCarthy just on a big picture. And that's, I believe, a big reason why he's no longer the coach of Dallas.
Wow. Several other ones I think are really interesting. Curious to get your thoughts. I think we all kind of know what went down here, but your thoughts on the Liam Coen drama. Bucs fans will say, we don't blame him for leaving. It's the way he went about it. I don't think I've ever, Jordan, seen this much
Right.
specific reporting about what the coach said, he said, she said. He takes about his kid and health. And I mean, it usually doesn't get to that level where it really feels like it's personal. And the Bucks really felt like they got a raw deal and
Yeah.
they wanted to make sure everybody knew about it. I mean,
Yeah.
they really went there with Liam Coen. And I'm just curious your thoughts.
I think the reason they went there, it's not the only reason, but a big reason why the Bucks went there is because they were upset that they could not get a hold of Liam Coen and his agent. And when that happened, and then they found out through the media that Liam Coen was in Jacksonville meeting with Sean Codd. When they found out that this Shad Khan experience was the whole day and it was a multiple hour meeting and that Jacksonville was full court pressing him, that's when they got really upset. And so if you go back a couple of days beforehand, when Liam Coen basically says, I'm going to stay in Tampa, he's going to be one of the highest paid coordinators in the league. That's $4.5 million. Everything changes when Trent Baalke gets fired. And Ross, it does not take a rocket scientist to realize that Trent Baalke should have been fired with Doug Peterson. And this is a guy that survives head coaches, right? He survived Jim Harbaugh and Urban Meyer and Jim Tom Sula. And I think any head coach, Liam Coen included, goes into that situation realizing that Trent Baalke reporting to him and working with him day in and day out is not an ideal situation. So Jacksonville realizes, albeit very late, that they need to move on from Trent if they're going to attract the type of top-tier head coach that they want. They identify Coen as the guy. When that happens, they start bombarding Liam Cohen's phone, text and calling. What can we do to make you reconsider? Is there any way you would come back to Jacksonville or come to Jacksonville for a second meeting? The first one was obviously Zoom, and give us a chance to present ourselves. When that happened and then Tampa's unable to get a hold of them, that's when things spiraled. And that's when I think the Bucks got really upset. And as it was explained to me, not only was Shad Khan going to essentially not let him out of the building, but Shad and the Jags were going to make Liam Coen say no to them, not once, but twice. And that really was the definitive point. And then also I'll add this. Coen is going to have a lot of autonomy, and he's going to be a big component of the GM search and moving forward with the roster. And I'll close with this. There's no guarantee, Ross, that you're going to get a head coaching job the next year because you're hot. And I think Byron Leftwich, ironically, turning down Jacksonville and then being out of the league for the next 3 years is a perfect example of it.
How about Bobby Slowick? You know, I mean, he had all those interviews last year, and now he gets fired. I mean, you got to strike while the iron's hot. I guess the thing I don't understand is, I guess the weird part of that, and again, this is like high school drama, but it's like, I guess to get the raise with the Bucks, part of the condition was he couldn't do a second interview with the Jags, which is why he lied about the second interview with the Jags. Because otherwise he would just say, I'm going to go to the Jags. I'm going to go do a second interview with the Jags. He's allowed to do that.
And he's also getting Ben Johnson type money, well above the double digit, double, triple what he'd make as a coordinator. But why, if you're the Bucks, why do you have to have the prerequisite of you can't take another interview? Like, this is an open market. When you're an OC, the next logical step is the head coach. This is something I would actually ask you. You would know this better than me. Is that a normal thing to do, to say if you take the interview, you're out?
Never heard of it. Never heard of it. We're offering you this raise to 4.5, highest paid coordinator, as long as you don't take the second interview. I had not heard of that before. And I guess that's why he said, he's with his family or he's doing whatever, because if it didn't work out with Jacksonville, he wanted to be able to go back to Tampa.
Sure.
But what I would say about that is, like, are they really, like, if you said you want to stay in Tampa, are they really going to say, oh, no, we're not giving you the raise because you went to Jacksonville again? Like,
yeah,
they wanted him to stay.
Yeah, and ownership was a part of this. They were very adamant about him staying. I think his relationship with Todd Bowles, Bowles really wanted him to stay, realizing that, if he lost him, then it's Canales and Coen back-to-back years. And just what he did with the offense. Baker Mayfield goes from 28 to 41 touchdowns, completion percentage, efficiency, everything skyrockets. The offense goes from 32nd to 4th in rushing. There was a lot of factors here that led Liam Coen to being one of these really hot candidates. And to be honest, Jacksonville, now that Balky's out, is a pretty good job. The roster, they have a lot of good players. And I think the quarterback Lawrence is viewed as someone that, with the right coaching, this will be his 4th coach in like 6 years, but with the right coaching, he can be a guy.
Let's talk about the Raiders a little bit on 2 accounts. Number one, it seemed like they really wanted Ben Johnson. And I do think it's interesting that Ben Johnson picked the Bears over the Raiders. I mean, especially with the GM for the Bears, Ryan Poles, already being in place. Is there any way to look at it, Jordan, other than he wanted Caleb Williams over whatever was in quarterback door number 2 in Las Vegas?
That's a fair question, but I'll counter it by saying, and I said this at the time, the idea that Ben Johnson was going to the Raiders and that he was the favorite there was never ever the case. It just wasn't. He had interest, obviously, from really everywhere. Chicago was always his, and I said this as well, Chicago was his number 1 destination. Like, this was where he wanted to be. And the Caleb Williams effect certainly played a role. And he said that. There's no secret there. But the Raiders roster and the lack of a quarterback, I think, made a big difference. And Chicago presented, I believe, a roster that he believes can win now with a lot of weapons. They have to upgrade the offensive line. But in terms of the quarterback and the young talent around him, there's a lot to be said about it. And I think as well, Chicago, he stays in the division, which I originally thought actually could be a deterrent. But I wonder if staying in the division was actually a positive for him because there's so much familiarity. But I never bought into the Raiders being the favorite. And I think Mark Davis even said yesterday that they weren't. And so, listen, like, who knows all the specifics here, but from my reporting and from what I've been told, Chicago was always going to be the job if he had it. And they were extremely adamant that he was their number 1 choice from the beginning. They were incredibly aggressive and pursued him all in. Like, this is your team. You're our guy. You can bring whichever staff. And now we've seen it with Detroit. You can bring any staff you want. And they brought a ton from Detroit. And that's why he's there.
Sticking with the Raiders and their aspect of it, they hire Pete Carroll. I think that the Raiders might have been the only team to interview Pete. I don't think anybody's written this or said this yet. I think the aspect of it that's interesting to me, Jordan, is Tom Brady is reportedly, by all accounts, running the show, and I'd love to get your insight there. But he picked 73-year-old Pete Carroll over however old Belichick is. Like, to me, that's very interesting that people are not talking about the fact he picked a really old coach, but not his really old coach that I think would have wanted the job probably.
Yeah, it's a great point. I should also add, by the way, with Chicago, to close that loop, that you mentioned Ryan Poles, also Kevin Warren. Kevin Warren was, I think, driving the ship in many ways, the team president. And so it's worth mentioning that for those who aren't familiar with him. In regard to the Raiders, so once they realized they were out of the Ben Johnson sweepstakes, which was pretty early, they switched their focus to Pete Carroll. And the reason they did it was because they looked around the room, that division, and they looked at Andy Reid and Jim Harbaugh and Sean Payton, and they said, we need an adult in the room. We need a coach that forget winning playoff games. Let's just get to respectability. Let's go from 4 wins to 8 wins or 9 wins. Let's be competitive and disciplined. And, Pete Carroll, for his age, I know he's in his mid-70s. He's the oldest coach in the league, and we'll get to Belichick in a second. His superpower, and this is not me talking, I've had these conversations over the years with Marshawn Lynch and Richard Sherman and Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, guys that have played multiple years for Pete in Seattle. And they say Pete's superpower is his ability to connect with players, his energy, and age isn't a factor with him. So he's going to rebuild that program. And I say program because that's really what it needs to become. It's been, we talked about the Cowboys roster being so irrelevant. The Raiders have been really irrelevant. And that roster stinks and they need a quarterback. But Pete Carroll, I think, at least gives them a high floor. And I don't even know what the ceiling is, but I know the floor is a lot higher. And that's a big positive. And as for Belichick, he didn't have the type of interest in the NFL that he thought he would get. And I think the Dallas job, I thought, made the most sense for him because he has a relationship with Jerry and Steven. But it's a really interesting point to consider what you just said, that if Tom Brady and the Raiders, and Tom is in all effect running the show, but if Tom really was going to go with a mid-70s coach, why not just go with Bill? And I don't know the answer.
Nobody does, other than I thought he might hire him, Jordan, just so he could fire him.
yeah. Kind of like a Billy Martin Steinbrenner thing. Just fire him. And yeah.
It's funny, having been with Brady and Belichick in 05 and 06 till I got traded to Cleveland, Belichick's tough, man. I mean, he is tough. It would be so fun to fire him. You know what I mean? And also, if you respected him, I mean, if you really thought he was a great coach, you'd think everything you just said about Pete Carroll and respectability,
that's Belichick too,
and the floor, everything goes to Belichick too, except for the connect with players and the energy and the positivity. What's so interesting is that there was a stretch where they were like the two best coaches, right? Playing against the other Super Bowls. They couldn't have been more polar opposite.
Different.
It's actually, I know you're into this stuff. Yeah. It's like fascinating where Pete Carroll's like 100% positive reinforcement. Belichick's 100% negative reinforcement. And somehow it worked for both of them for a while.
Yeah, it's true. If you ever go to a Pete Carroll practice, and I can only judge from Seattle and also hearing about SC, but Seattle specifically, that the Pete Carroll practice is something to see. I mean, it's rap and hip hop full on. He's running around like he's 18 years old throwing a football. He's a rah guy. He's a dynamic personality. Belichick is the antithesis of that. I can't imagine Belichick playing Drake or Kendrick Lamar in a practice. Like, that's just not going to happen, right? But Pete Carroll encourages that. Both guys incredibly successful. And I got to be honest, a month ago, I thought, no way does Pete Carroll get hired. I really didn't believe he was going to be in this cycle. And if it wasn't for the Raiders, he wouldn't have been.
Check him out on social media. As you can tell, this guy is as plugged in as anyone. Used to be only a couple insiders people would talk about. Jordan Schultz is now one of those guys that everybody has to follow on social media.
Thank you, Ross.
Everybody has to know. He is one of the guys now for sure. At Schultz_report. Jordan, thank you so much for the time, man. I really appreciate it.
Ross, my pleasure. And I love this shirt. Go Tigers, baby. Ross, one side note. I graduated from Occidental College. The founders of Princeton founded Occidental, also the Tigers.
I love it, and I wear Princeton almost every day. Listen, if you weren't like a Pro Bowl player, it's all branding, okay? I'm at least going to be the smart guy. Or, yeah, that's the guy that went to the Ivy League. That's the guy that went to Harvard or Princeton. It's all branding, man. Thank you, dude.
My pleasure, brother. See ya.
So on Monday, I gave the Chiefs their flowers because they deserve it. Now today, it's time for you to give your significant other her flowers. There's only one place I trust, 1-800-Flowers.com. Every single year, I order flowers from 1-800-Flowers. Here's what I did. If you go to right now, 1-800-Flowers, to make sure you're a Valentine's hero, double the roses for free. When you buy 1 dozen, they'll double your bouquet to 2 dozen roses. This is incredible. It's actually my daughter's birthday on February 9th. So I did this. I ordered 2 dozen roses. I'm going to give 1 dozen to my wife for her for Valentine's Day, the other dozen to my daughter for her birthday. It's genius. To claim your Double Your Roses offer, go to 1-800-Flowers.com/Ross. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/Ross. The only thing better than game day predictions are the foods that come with them. Introducing Tums Fantasy Foodball Pool, brought to you by Tums, America's #1 antacid brand, and DraftKings. Turn football into foodball by building your best game day plate for a shot at winning a share of $40,000 in cash prizes. Join the Tums foodball action during this playoff season's most heartburn-inducing time. Visit DraftKings.com/Tums foodball now through February 9th to enter for free and select your game day plate before the start of each playoff round. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See terms at DraftKings.com/Tums foodball. Don't let heartburn keep you on the sidelines. Try Tums Chewy Bites with a tasty outer shell and soft center for fast relief of heartburn, acid indigestion, and upset stomach. Check out Tums Gummy Bites, featuring a soft and easy-to-chew format for fast relief of occasional heartburn, acid indigestion, sour stomach, and upset stomach. Both available at Amazon, Target, and other major retailers nationwide. Be sure to follow Tums at Tums Official on Instagram and TikTok. Looks like tickets are actually coming down a little bit for the Super Bowl, Jack. That happens a lot of times. And you can get in now for $3,800. It's not bad to be able to get in $3,800. And that's the all-in price, thanks to my friends on the Game Time app. Their Game Time pick right now is lower section 121, row 30 for $5,200. You can see the all-in pricing, the view from your seat. You know you're getting the lowest price guarantee. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code ROSS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, so again, create an account, redeem code ROSS for $20 off. Download Game Time today, last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, we missed this one the other day, but the NFL announced their finalists for all of the awards that will be given out on Thursday night at the NFL Honors event.
Yeah, I guess the first thing that jumped out to me is probably some of the guys that weren't nominated. You know, like I thought Mikey Sanderstill deserved to be one of the 5 finalists for Defensive Rookie of the Year. The other thing that jumped out is that the Eagles had like 5 candidates. Saquon for MVP and Offensive Player of the Year, and Fangio, and Cooper DeJean, and Bond, and Quinyon Mitchell. Howie Roseman got them all this offseason. All of them this offseason. Super duper impressive. We will find out next Thursday who actually wins these things. I don't know if we'll have time Friday morning to let you guys know who actually was the winners or not. We might have already recorded that episode. That's actually a really good question. I will also say the Cowboys, I forgot to say this yesterday, Jack, they gave an extension to Will McClay. He's done a nice job with their drafts. He's basically the highest ranking official for the Cowboys when it comes to the personnel. They'll never give him the GM title because Jerry likes to have it, but Will McClay, very impressive. All right, the Super Bowl is set. It is the Eagles and the Chiefs. I've been telling you guys about Smirnoff being an official sponsor of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast all year. So you already know that they're also an official vodka partner of the NFL and Super Bowl 59. What I love about Smirnoff is that you can get the world's #1 vodka without breaking the bank. Very important. This feeling is what the good folks over at Smirnoff call Smirnoff Extraordinary. And yes, I can say that way better than the guys in the TV commercial. They've got some awesome items right now dropping, including from Vernon Davis. You got to check it out. Head on over to SmirnoffDrops.com to check out upcoming drops and check out these Smirnoff Extraordinary items. Go quick. They won't last long. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Pricing at sole discretion of the retailer. May vary by state. Please not share with anyone under legal drinking age. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. By far the best Valentine's Day gift I'm aware of. She is worth it. myfrontpagestory.com. Backofficescheduler.com. HumanHeadNYC.com. Sporticulture. Pizza Boy Brewing.